Hi and welcome to Bedrock's third webinar in the series of best practice. So it's improving language and improving outcomes. We're looking at today how pastoral and the academic come in side by side, and they have just as much impact on a student's outcomes, and actually we can address those by improving literacy. As you can see, it's less of a panel today, but more of a discussion with Daisy and I. Daisy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name's Daisy and I work at Harris Academy Beckenham, which is a school just in South East London. And I'm 2 IC of English and oversee Bedrock across the academy.
Excellent. So, I mean, we have actually spoken to Charlotte Evans, who is overseeing a Bedrock and Harris Federation. So, you know, it's quite nice to see it within the school context as well, and you know, how it works there. But yeah, it's going to be more of a discussion between us two. Let's just go on to the key findings from the Oxford Language Report. Now, last webinar, we looked at disciplinary literacy, and I drew very heavily from the Education Endowment Foundation. This week, we're looking at the Oxford Language Report, bridging the gap, the vocabulary gap at transition. Now, unsurprisingly, 92% of teachers feel that lockdown had a negative impact on widening the vocabulary gap. Anecdotally, how did you find, you know, the impact of lockdown, Daisy, when students returned? Or was it actually you had most students in school anyway?
No, we didn't have lots of students in school, far more in the first lockdown than the second, obviously. But when the students came back, it was more the kind of the mental health side that I think I noticed in my classroom, and the anxiety that had kind of accumulated in certain students more so than I would have thought could have happened. And that led itself lots of students sort of withdrawing and not necessarily engaging either verbally or through writing or reading in lessons. There's quite a lot of withdrawal. And then looking at the students' work that they were producing, there was, it was regression was essentially what we were seeing across the board. It wasn't even just a stagnation or a lack of progress. Students had, in fact, I think at that point gone backwards. Which was obviously a massive concern at that point.
Yeah, and actually, literacy is about communication, and that comes with confidence. And I was quite interested to talk to a number of teachers who said exactly the same thing, that it really impacted oracy and students' willingness to participate in the lesson and contribute. And I think, like you said, it's down to that self-esteem and anxiety. I don't know whether sort of lots of news also talking about catch up and how far behind students are, and kind of obviously there was that regression, but I don't know how helpful it is to keep reminding them of that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, we had specific training here before the students came back to school around the language that we were using with them to combat just what you were saying there, because obviously catch up and falling behind, and the GCSEs were coming up at the time we were back in school as well. So it's obviously something we were trying to protect our students from, even though they were aware of their own context.
Yeah.
So it was much more about positive reinforcement and phrasing about what we can achieve, where we're going, moving forward, instead of just accepting that, okay, this is where we're at and we're never going to get to where we should be, and no comparisons with previous years as well. That was something that we weren't. I didn't do either, make comparisons, but if you had done your GCSEs, then you'd be at this point. That wouldn't have been helpful or productive for us or them, to be fair. So
that's really quite interesting that you had whole staff training on the language that you were all going to use. So there was that unity of vision, all singing from the same hymn sheet, and that really must have supported your students greatly. In terms of transition, 90% of teachers believe that the vocabulary gap widens and becomes more apparent when students are writing for a range of purposes and a range of audiences when they move from primary to secondary school. And that's unsurprising because there's more academic vocabulary, there's more subjects, and it really does step up. I think Alex quickly mentioned that they see it's like 20% academic vocabulary in primary school to sort of 80% in, And that's essentially tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary that they're coming up against in every single subject. Have you found that it impacts accessibility for students to the curriculum at year 7 when they come in?
Yeah, 100%. I think it kind of stands for itself, doesn't it, with the work that's being produced. And it's also interesting when we have trainings where we say, oh, this is what a year 6 can produce at the end of their and the English work they can produce is stunning. And then I'm looking now, I've just marked the year 7 assessments for the end of the year, and I'm thinking, oh, that something's gone awry here. And I think it's this maybe this element of it them being stretched, and obviously the jump up and how much their brain is having to now process and retain. But it's just about trying to, I suppose our job is to try and kind of facilitate them holding on to what they have got and not losing that because they're putting more information into the box, as it were.
Yeah, so, it's very interesting. I remembered that, just sort of seeing that the written work at year 6 compared to some of the written work in year 7. I don't know. Yeah, like you say, it's overload, cognitive overload for them. But also perhaps like the way that we design our tasks in secondary school compared to the tasks which are often project based in primary. But it'd be really good to marry those up more. Anyway, I'm going to leave with this final point, just because this kind of links to what I did a webinar in March about how we need to marry student well-being with student progress. And I think, it really, really is important at this time. But student self-esteem, 80% of all teachers believe that limited vocabulary impacts student self-esteem. Why do we think that is? I'm going to come in there because I already kind of have formed my thoughts on this. But I think if you don't have the vocabulary to express yourself and your experience, you're going to have less confidence, I think. I don't know if you found that in class.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it also that then amounts to greater frustration and then poorer behaviour, and then it becomes a cycle. And then you get the outburst, well, no one understands me, or no one cares what I'm thinking, which obviously if pause and the ability to articulate themselves better, that wouldn't necessarily be the case.
Yeah, and I mean, Alex quickly also, I actually recently did some training with him, but he also said, it's almost masking, they're not quite it's a coping mechanism, that behaviour often. And when we had Ellie Ashton come on the last panel, she actually said it was the same students often that had that low level of literacy, and all the teachers, when she showed them the sort of representative, they thought it was the students with behaviour points, but actually it was a literacy issue. So I think they can come hand in hand, not always necessarily, but it is something to bear in mind. Now, in terms of, what strategies you're using across your school, in your department, so what do you use in terms of improving literacy, improving outcomes that are manageable, meaningful, and sustainable? And we'll unpack those 3 words as well as you go. But what strategies are you using?
So I think there's kind of a 2-pronged element here. It's how Bedrock is sort of sold to the staff, as it were, and then how the staff sell it to the students. It's a kind of a jigsaw, as it were. And I think I'm very lucky here at Beckenham that the English team are completely dedicated to making Bedrock work for our students, and they're completely happy to make routines in their lessons around Bedrock and incorporating it and championing it. So I think that in itself, staff buying is one part. And then in terms of the lessons, as I say, the idea of a routine, every lesson starts with a new word being taught explicitly to then be looked at in a set of reading and then incorporated in the writing later on. And more often than not, we're going to the Bedrock, signing in, finding maybe a PP student or an SEN student who isn't making the progress we would like them to be, and picking up on a word that maybe they're struggling with, and teaching that to the whole class then, because it's not limiting anybody else's progress, but it's supporting those students that need the additional nudge in the right direction. And I think other things that I have asked my team what they've got. just reminders in lessons, just saying to them verbally, oh, don't forget Bedrock's due in on this day. Having the same Bedrock hand-in day is something that's really helped us as an academy, actually. And then just celebrating everything. If it's seen as a fun and exciting venture for them to embark on, then they'll want to do so. And alongside that comes competitions. So it can be class competitions, competitions within the lesson, staff leaderboard, class leaderboards, get presented in assembly every week. So I just work out the class averages for points, send it through, and then postcards home, contact home for the students that either make the most progress or achieve the most points, because you want to vary it, because it's usually the same students getting the most points every week as well.
Yeah. So you vary it from like time spent to engagement as well as progress.
Yes, yeah. Because otherwise it is always just the same students achieving the best. And sometimes just the points achieved or time spent, they aren't the students that are going to benefit the most from the platform. So you want to target.
Recognize, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Actually, it sounds like essentially the strategies that you have in place, you make really explicit. So this is what we're all doing. This is how we practice and learn language. So it's that power of practice. We're all, coming back to what's the synonym for that, using it in our writing, double checking. And when you were saying, you might pick out some words that particular students are struggling with and teach them explicitly within the classroom, the phrase that comes to mind is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Actually, it's necessary for that student, but actually really helpful for all students. So why not use that, across the board? But I think making the sort of invisible processes that you're doing, people are quietly getting on with Bedrock for homework, making it really explicit and high profile in assembly, in tutor times, like you say. So I can imagine that students are really, excited with all your competitions and celebrations. But in terms of staff buy-in, you said that your English department were really driving it. How have you managed to get everyone really really positive about it and motivated and empowered to use the data?
So to start with, in September when we took it on, it was looking at lockdown statistics. I mean, everyone being bombarded with the catch up that was needed for our students, and how much time they'd lost and how much progress they weren't making. So simply just having headlines on the board and saying that this is what we're dealing with every day, and it's really easy for us to become desensitized to it, being teachers, having just lived through COVID. But this isn't the reality that we want our students to experience by any account. So to start with, I think that the context of this year was fine, because it's more important than ever that our students make more than expected progress. And then I think from then on in, it's at certain times of the year, reminding staff why we are doing this, and then relaying that back to our particular context in our school. So looking specifically at reading ages and how far they've either gone up or gone down, or looking at specific students. So with the reports that come through from you, where you say, what our PP students have achieved, what our SEN students have achieved, again, that makes it more specific to our context. The staff are thinking, okay, but it is impactful to individuals, rather than just all students need to learn words because words make them better. That's not tangible.
Yes, very general. Well, that kind of brings in the meaningful and sustainable, because actually if you are getting that regular data, it sustains your motivation and it's meaningful over a long period of time.
Yeah, that's it. And it's just a weekly reminder in our department meetings. And I think the assembly also is a nudge for the teachers as well. Just that Bedrock is part of our culture now. It's not even just an add-on to a lesson. It's part of what we do here. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah, well, great. In terms of impact, I should actually, just going back to strategies I have used, and I suppose it's slightly different from Bedrock, but when I used to be in the classroom, I really, really championed oracy and speaking out loud before setting things down on paper. And I don't know if you've heard of the Jack Petchey Awards and the Jack Petchey doing those. I used to always put students in for those. And there's also a poetry slam competition that used to be run every year in London, which students loved, particularly students that didn't really associate making bars and things to English. Even though us as English teachers, we know that is poetry, that's writing lyrics, that's, so it's almost the code switching. So you're using that within this context, but you can actually, adapt it and use within this context. You've got the content, you've got the knowledge, we just need to adapt it for your context. So, within this essay now, we're just going to use slightly different vocabulary, but you've got the gist of it, if that makes sense. But I used to find that I could grasp whether students got the gist of it through the oracy, through the verbal communication. But anyway, so that was a strategy, but that's more of a sort of just one person in the classroom strategy, but always, I think, powerful, particularly when it comes to building that self-esteem and confidence with writing as well, and thinking like a geographer, historian, all the different disciplines. If you could speak out loud before doing everything, I think it does have an impact. Okay. So what impact has this had on student attainment? So you were mainly saying your main strategy has been Bedrock, implementing Bedrock, which teaches tier 2 vocabulary explicitly through non-fiction and fiction texts. Just for those that might not know, what has been the impact, and have you seen, a knock-on effect on self-esteem, well-being, and behaviour, do you think?
Yeah, I think as you touched on earlier, I think they are all intertwined. It is what makes a person, isn't it? Ultimately, so I think that they are all interlinked. In terms of attainment, that stands for itself in the writing that they're producing, that students are producing. There has been an improvement since September to what students are writing now, both academically in a kind of non-fiction style as well as creatively. I think that it's really clear from kind of reading engagement as well. I'd say that there's a much better culture this year for our students with reading and their willingness to read widely compared to previous years. So I think that's something for us to harness and make use of next year. And in terms of their self-esteem and well-being, I think aside from, or in addition to what we were saying earlier about giving them the tools to articulate themselves, and maybe even identify within themselves what they're thinking or feeling in the moment, on the more simplistic level of having the leaderboard on the screen and the teacher saying, oh, look, this student's done really well, this student's done really well. Their self-esteem in an academic sense and a sense of pride and achievement, it can give them that motivation to have aspirations, which for some of our students they might not have outside of the classroom. So it's building their self-esteem and well-being,
and the growth mindset as well. Yeah. In terms of what you were saying there, building students' self-esteem and aspirations in terms of the academic aspirations, I guess that plays a huge part in building that culture that you have at Harris Beckenham of actually, you can all achieve and all aspire to for excellence. That's what I've got when I've ever visited Harris Beckenham.
Well, yeah. Certainly that's what we try to instill in our students, and I think we're seeing that in terms of higher rates of students staying with us for sixth form, and the kind of the standard of universities that they're moving on to and whatever else. So I think it's obviously a slow process. It's part of what happens as schools develop. But yes, no, I think our students, as well as having self-belief or accumulating self-belief, it creates it in terms of well-being and behavior. It allows us to build positive relationships with our students as well. So through the praise, through the conversation, and you're able to have personalized conversations as well through, oh, you achieved this amount of points, or I know you spent this amount of time. It gives it shows the students that you're interested in them, and I think it makes things a little bit easier that way. So they get self-belief and they know that we believe in them as well, which is a busy school. It's been a most hectic year. Sometimes it's easy to lose sight of why you walk into school every day. and I think this is a really easy to use platform that helps you build that kind of personalization with your students again. It is, I think, what we found here.
That's great. Yeah, so using that tangible data to build those relationships and give students that recognition that they deserve for all their hard work and the progress they're making. I think one thing also is not shying away from the difficult words, tier 2 words and tier 3 words, having those high expectations always and not paring it down too much. Actually, if I'm going to teach this thoroughly and in a research-based way, we will get you there. So I feel very strongly about, having those high expectations. And I think that comes in with what you were saying there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think, again, and it's a way of teaching them to have high expectations of themselves, which, again, we're thinking about creating people that go out into the world, not just students that produce an exam paper at the end of year 11. That's what we're hoping to instill in them.
And I mean, just coming back to my obsession with oracy, we used to always insist at the academy I was working at in Hackney on full sentences and using standard English, particularly in the classroom setting. And I think that, using that confidently and consistently and regularly does build up a student's, build up their self-esteem. Jeff Barston calls academic vocabulary the language of power. If you go into a job interview, you'll be expected to speak in standard English and, use full sentences. So why not start practicing now? I think that had a huge impact. I used to also say, if you were to work for a company and you sent an email that had, all these mistakes, obviously, in an ideal world, we'll double check and spot them, but it represents the company that's employing you. It says something about them. So actually it is worth having those literacy skills for lots of different scenarios outside the classroom. And sometimes it needs explicitly explaining and telling to the students, because sometimes they're just like, oh, I didn't think this was that important, because, when you text, you don't have to do, you don't have to do that. Okay. Why do you think improving language has such a huge impact? I feel like we've covered this one. Did you want to add anything onto this one?
Again, I think we've sort of covered it, and I just think it's about I think student outcomes is such a broad thing. It doesn't just now mean academic success, does it? And I think that's working with sort of literacy teams and pastoral leads and behaviour management and parent contact with home, I think is really important to build on the pastoral and the academic. And again, Bedrock is something that we found gives us that way in to keep regular and purposeful contact with home.
Around teaching and learning.
Exactly. So it's not always just, oh, so-and-so hasn't behaved well this lesson again, or they had to be removed or whatever else. It can be really focused for their success, essentially, which is a much better and productive conversation for everybody than potentially what could have been otherwise.
Yes, and actually, just thinking about the term literacy, there's you've got your cultural literacy, critical literacy, emotional literacy. All of these are important for within the exam setting, to have that general knowledge of the world. But also, I think more and more they're really valued, and needed within society to be, that citizen we want them to be. Is that emotional literacy, and actually to have the words to express themselves. But having that receptive understanding, so understanding what's, understanding what's being said is one thing to navigate the world, but being able to express yourself is where we want them to be. And I think, like you say, it ties in the two. But you did bring in parents there, so it's quite interesting to just sort of look at 9 out of 10 teachers surveyed believe that parents and carers are very important in the development of their child's vocabulary. I feel quite strongly about this, and I feel like parent engagement or sort of school parent partnerships have really become more and more pertinent given the last year's context. But I actually did a master's in it in 2018, how schools use Bedrock to reach out and communicate with parents and get parents engaged in their child's learning and have a clear understanding of where they're, what words they know and, how they're getting on with their homework. You touched on it being used. How have you used it specifically? Has it been parents' evenings or open days?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a variety of things that we've done. So at the start of the year, obviously contacted all parents with their access codes and students' logins, which we had a much bigger uptake this year than we've had previously, which is really good and really helps keep them on track. So if we're contacting home in the unfortunate event that maybe the book hasn't been completed to the standard we've asked for, they're aware of it already. And I think also from that, there was then kind of the regular weekly contact if your child maybe hasn't completed the homework, or again if they've got above and beyond the expectations that even we've set, then contacting to praise, and that's always been more of a focus for us.
That's good.
Praise and the positive conversations.
That's very easily forgotten, aren't they? Because you have to chase people that haven't done it, but actually praising those that have is really crucial.
Yeah, and then when it happens then in the classroom as well, the students don't want to be the students that aren't being praised or are being overlooked. They want the reinforcement that the others are getting. So it works sometimes maybe a little bit of a slower process, but over time it creates a better, I think, atmosphere and culture towards it. And then every half term, so to ensure that our students are doing their homework still over the holiday break, because it's just as important. Then what we've seen is that students aren't at school, that they don't make the progress. We can't have that again. So we've instilled it over the half terms as well. Just a quick text home to parents, please, a quick reminder, complete 20 points, 30 points of Bedrock, whatever it is that we've asked for. And then what we've found as well is, as the year's gone on, parents are more proactive with contacting us about the homework and about their students' progress, rather than us reaching out to them the whole time.
Oh, great. So it's more reciprocal.
Yeah, definitely. And I think over time that will only but develop and progress. So I think, generally speaking, it's been a really positive thing for us to be able to keep in contact with our parents outside of the standard parents' evenings, as it were, which just makes the whole teaching experience and learning experience for the students a much, much healthier, I think, and happier time.
Yeah. And again, they're getting that 360 support because their parents get that automated email just saying, nudge your homework, the Bedrock homework's due before that it is due, so that they can actually support their children with that. I was always taken aback with parents were always taken aback with how difficult the words are on Bedrock. They're all challenging, and but then you show them a GCSE text or a SATs paper, even in primary school, and actually that's the level that they need to be at. So I think it's quite good for parents to have that realization as well. So it's okay, we need to think carefully about what books we're choosing and things like that as well. Okay. In terms of we keep talking about vocabulary and how we can build it in with the curriculum. Obviously, Bedrock Vocabulary does that. But you can actually do it. So Bedrock Vocabulary teaches Tier 2 vocabulary. Bedrock Mapper, which has come out now, teaches Tier 3 vocabulary. It's built by subject teachers or any kind of teacher. So Key Stage 2 upwards, and it's using the same research-based sequence. You have the word is taught with the student-friendly description and example. Then they have that dual coding with the image. They have non-examples, examples, so synonyms and antonyms, depending on the subject, and formulas if they're maths and science, and then a task at the end to see if they can use it and apply it. So you can see here, there's so many words, and actually these words unlock the knowledge. If they have that comprehension, it unlocks the knowledge. And you were saying before how your students were were less reluctant to pick up a whole range of books. They're getting that exposure to this kind of language, so their comprehension is going to improve. And it would be great if that happened with a Tier 3 as well, and that would really reinforce what's going on with your Bedrock vocabulary. But yeah, I just wanted to also say, most of you will have been sent this, but I actually designed this, so I'm personally quite proud of this. The summer challenge booklets, they are based on our topics, and they're encouraging the students to go out and discover the world and explore the world after a year of being locked in. So, you know, crucial part of language learning is interaction. So we want them to go out there and interact. So it might be a nice way to finish off term, printing these out, or it might be a nice way to send them home and at the beginning of the summer. So just something to bear in mind to make your lives a little bit easier in this final week. It's quite telling that, you know, 2 of our participants weren't able to make it today. I know you're extremely tired and very busy, and I just want to say you're doing a really, really great job. Daisy, thank you so much for participating and talking with me today. Really appreciate your insight and yeah, and all the things that you've shared with us.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Daisy, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.